Hi Colin, so this is part 3 of the transport videos, and also the final model video that I'll probably do for a while, thank God. Not that I haven't enjoyed them, but these transport videos in particular have been quite difficult to try and get the information across in the best way possible, because it's quite it's not really a complicated subject. It's quite a simple subject in many ways. The facts are quite simple, but the emotion and the kind of myth and noise and history and the different interpretation from different people that's gone on around this, it is quite complicated, and certainly there's quite a lot of baggage comes with our discussions around bypasses and bridges in Hereford and transport solutions in general. So I'm also conscious that I bashed the Conservatives a little bit in my videos, and I don't do this just for the kicks of it, because I actually quite like most of my colleagues on the opposition benches, and I think that all of them are trying to do what they think is right for the county, in the same way that all of us in administration are trying to do what we think is right. I do think it's important, though, to keep apportioning responsibility to them for the failure to deliver anything after 12 years, and to have a plan or a lack of plans for delivering, one solution only, which is a Western bypass, in another 10 years' time. It's nearly a quarter of a century that they may have been, essentially, that their kind of scheme would take to be delivered, and I don't think actually would be delivered, especially when we've just gone through COVID now, which has further changed the world. I mean, the climate emergency declarations locally and nationally should have been a wake-up call to our previous administration, but COVID and the way that's changed is also must be a massive wake-up call to everyone. We're just not going to travel in the same way in a personal motor vehicle, I don't think, ever again. But perhaps that's a personal interpretation of the last point about COVID. I think one of the reasons why the Conservatives still cling to the idea that a Western bypass is the best thing is because the review said that the review ranked all the 6 options that were taken forward in terms of how much they were going to cost, the damage they were going to do to the environment, how much they were going to reduce congestion by, etc., etc. And one of the things you've got to be careful about with projected metrics, I mean, stats are bad enough as best you can kind of gather them, but at least they're about facts. But projections are much more difficult to do. So if you think that when the people like WSP projected a huge reduction in congestion by putting in the City Link Road and it didn't happen, no one's really challenged them after that. So we've got to take projections a little bit with a pinch of salt. But they did project that the Western Bypass package, because it comes with 2 other elements, would have about a 29% reduction in congestion. But then again, they said that the Eastern Link would have about a 24% reduction in congestion, would actually be cheaper and quicker, in my opinion, quicker, but certainly cheaper. And they said cheaper to build and less environmentally damaging. So that's one part of it. The other part of it is that that Western Bypass package includes walking and cycling, which will bring a vast amount of reduction in congestion. And it also includes demand management, which the Conservatives say they're against. So they don't accept that you might have to put up car parking charges to encourage more people in the city to travel by a different way. They don't accept that you should be charging, employers should be, paying a premium for having lots of people park in their city centre car parks, for example. So workplace car parking charging, they don't believe in. But those are the 2 elements that are in that make up the 3 elements for the Western Bypass. So they're sort of cherry picking it and saying that they believe in the 29% reduction projected congestion relief, but they don't believe in it. But they're not going to do the other 2 things that are part of that to make that package. So it's really extraordinary kind of disconnect that I sometimes struggle with. The other thing to remember is that, let's say we spent $250 million and took another 10 years to build a Western Bypass and got this reduction in traffic congestion. Apart from the fact that we're not getting people out of cars travelling in a healthier and better way, that would only actually translate to less than 5 minutes in journey time saving. And so, you've really, really got to think about the party that claims to be the party of business and frugality and, efficient management of public funds, thinking that it's anything like a good idea to spend all that money on something that's going to, make very little difference to our lives. We're much better looking at the resilience of a bridge in the east and looking at getting people out of their cars in the city so other people can use that space if they have to drive in from further out. I just thought I'd finish this off by doing a little bit of a roundup of the kind of most commonly asked questions on there, or most commonly stated points. We're the only city or town of our size that doesn't have a bypass in the country. Well, that's not true. Glasgow doesn't have one. Dudley doesn't have one. They're much bigger than us in many ways. One's a town, one's a city. Partly, I suppose, because both of those places have strategic roads fairly close by, in the same way that actually we have a strategic road in Ross, at Ross, with the M50 and the A40. So why would we be encouraging? One of the things the Conservatives is they went to go and get support from the Welsh Government and said, use us as an overflow for the M5. Be great. You can come up through Hereford instead if you're struggling on the motorway network. They use that as a plus point. Well, we don't want to encourage that. If you want to go north from South Wales, go up on the motorway. Do not come through Hereford. It's not something we want to encourage. The second one is that we're the only place in the county that doesn't have a bypass. Bromwell's got one, Ledbury's got one. Well, that's not true either. I know you may not like the idea of it, but in 1966, when the new bridge was built, when Greyfriars was built, it took traffic off the 49 that used to go directly through Broad Street in Hightown. And whether it went far enough west or whether it serves its purpose or whatever you want to believe, it doesn't matter. It was a dual carriageway and a new bridge, and it took traffic out of the actual centre of Hereford and put it alongside it. So it does have one. It was called the Inner Relief Road, 1966. We can have all the other arguments about whether or not it served the purpose, whether it's far enough out. That's another story. But don't say we're the only place that hasn't got a bypass, because we got one first. We're the most congested, or one of the most congested places, second most congested place in the city. That's in the country. That's absolute rubbish. Google it, as Dan Bridges once said to me. Google it, and you will find that we don't even feature in the top 20, 30, 40, okay? We are just simply not as congested as people think we are. What we are, I think, is we do have slow traffic over short distance. And I think there was a sat tracking company that said that Hereford was the second slowest city back in 2014 or whatever it was. But that's because we do get a jam over a short period of time. We know it's the Belmont Road, and then once we get onto, or it's that stretch on the bridge in Edgar Street, the traffic is kind of, we do go slow over a short period, over a short distance, but we're not kind of congested in the same way that some of the other big places are. And I mean, that same SatTrack or SatNav, whatever the heck it was, survey also said that the M25, was the most congested motorway network and only had an average speed of something like 25 miles an hour. So many times people have said to me that, the best thing that ever happened to congestion was putting an M25 in London. Well, it hasn't made a difference. It's still congested. People say the same thing about Worcester. Look at Worcester. It's built all that beautiful road and bypass and extensions to bypasses and link roads and everything else. It's still congested. So, this just comes back to this point. Do you solve the traffic mode problem, or do you just say that you only believe in car use, and to try and keep making more space, you keep building more roads, and as a result of that, you just keep encouraging more people to use cars? The money was there. No, it wasn't. We've covered this already, but it wasn't there. It's simple. It wasn't. The only money that was allocated was for the South-wide Transport Package and the Southern Link Road, and we couldn't produce a business case because of all sorts of issues, including the cock-up on the procurement. The other one is I'm stuck in traffic now. If a bypass came, I want to get angry with councillors, because if they just cracked on with things, I'd be out of the trouble tomorrow. As I said, no, you wouldn't. 10 years on the previous administration's plans to get traffic sorted with a western bypass. I live far out. I can't use a bike. I can't cycle in from Madley. I can't get a bus from Kimbolton, wherever. Those are fair points, and partly we want to make the buses better so that you can. And I would love to have cycle routes all the way from Madley into town, segregated cycle routes, and we could put the money into that. And people say, that costs a fortune. You're just about to spend $250 million on a road for a few miles to the west of Hereford. So why don't we spend it on something better? But the point is that if we free up the high amount of people in Hereford City who travel short distances and get them travelling in a different way, the folks from Madley and our farmers coming in from distance and everyone else, they can use their vehicles in a way and for roads that are going to be, clearer. And we can do that more quickly than the 10 years it's going to take. What makes you an expert on transport? You're a FedEx, they don't know a FedEx driver necessarily, but you live in Middleton on the Hill, you live in a rural ward. Well, so did Philip Price, the Conservative who was in charge for many years. He was a farmer. He is a farmer. I actually did work as a courier for many years, for over 10 years. So I do know a little bit about the roads of Hereford City and also the surrounding roads. And I also worked as a binman. So I know a lot about the country roads and the issues. So, we don't pretend to be experts, but what we should do as councillors when we come in is get people sitting around the corner, round a table, and trying to get them to, solve the problems we know are there. And our input is to basically to hold them to account and to make them do things properly and to use evidence rather than just try and force them to do what we want because we've got an ideological bent on something. One final thing is about cyclists. I know this is a bugbear of many. Cyclists shouldn't be cycling on pavements, and no, they shouldn't. There's two issues here. Cyclists are not supposed to cycle on pavements that are used by pedestrians if they're designated as pedestrian pavements. Sometimes they're these shared spaces that the Conservatives have been bringing in and other people have been bringing in other places, but in Hereford the Conservatives have been pursuing the shared cycle space, which I've stopped because it's actually now against government advice anyway, but prior to that it wasn't a clever idea. But generally cyclists shouldn't be on pavements. It is against the highway code, and I think the reason they do it is because they're worried about the main road sometimes, because there isn't segregated routes for them to use, and sometimes they're not separated from traffic. So unless it's a very low-speed environment, they're worried about cycling on the main road, especially if they're young or they're vulnerable. So they do tend to cycle on pavements, but they shouldn't. The simple answer is they shouldn't. But police tend to take a bit of a sort of balanced view on this because they know that people are worried about cycling on roads that don't have decent cycle lane provision at the moment, or segregated cycle lane provision in particular. So I think the general rule is car drivers, vehicle drivers should be courteous and mindful of cyclists, no matter how much they may or may not wind us up. And likewise, cyclists should be courteous of people on pavements, for this, whether or not they wind them up or not. We've all got to live in a kinder world. But the more that we can bring in decent cycle lanes, the less likely we're going to have anyone having these kind of conflicts. And I think that's it, Colin. Sorry I've rambled. That's about 30 odd minutes I've done. I hope that's been helpful. I'm happy to come back and do more at a different point, but for now I'm going to log off and watch the rugby. And I'm not going to say who I want to win, because that's too dangerous in Hereford.